Good evening. Okay, you know we're going to do that again, right? Good evening. Much better. Welcome to the Tadeuchi Democracy Forum at the Japanese American National Museum for tonight's conversation on high-density housing. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name's John Cohn. I am the managing producer of forum programs and live events at KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I got to look at the script to make sure I don't forget who I am. Together with our on-air and online colleagues, we work to connect unique and relevant content to unique and relevant audiences. And tonight is one of those events that does just that with people like yourselves. Building on a variety of coverage that our newsroom has done on affordability in Southern California in recent weeks and months, tonight's event marks the launch of a forum series entitled Rescuing the California Dream, Policies for an Affordable Future. And we're delighted to be able to co-present this series with our friends at the Milken Institute. For more on that, please welcome the Managing Director of the California Center and the Managing Economist of the Milken Institute, Kevin Clouden.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much to our friends at KPCC. Without this, would not at all be possible. Just to give you a brief background on the Milken Institute, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank in Santa Monica. So yes, we really did have to fight an hour-and-a-half traffic to get here. And we are in particular focused in three areas: job creation, access to capital, and health. And at the core of those areas, affordability is a key issue. As part of our goal in this forum series, starting with tonight talking about housing, is to talk about key issues for people being able to live and work here in Los Angeles. Not only are we focusing on the fact that it's very difficult to find a house and afford it, let alone near where you work, we are also focused on issues of student debt, the fact that one of the main problems for a lot of people in coming out of college is that they have no ability to buy anything of any significance, whether it's a new car or a house, because they're still paying off their student loans. And lastly, the fact that to truly be able to afford and prosper in this city, people need to be able to get high quality jobs and have small businesses that are able to hire those people and offer those jobs. This is so over these three forums in this series, we'll be discussing these, culminating with a session at the Milken Institute California Summit in December, where we will be working with KPCC to have an overarching summary panel at the summit discussing more about these key issues. Thank you very much for coming here tonight, and we look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Kevin. And now to say a couple words about KPCC Southern California Public Radio, I'd like to introduce you to its president, Bill Davis.
Thank you all for coming this evening. We very, very much appreciate it. And man, those lights are bright. I can't see anybody. I've been here at KPCC 14 and a half years. When I came to KPCC in early 2001, at that time, KPCC was one of the least listened to public radio stations in the country. It was about to have its Corporation for Public Broadcasting support removed. And my boss, at the time I was working at National Public Radio, my boss said to me, you've just committed professional suicide. And my response was, well, that might be true, but that beats working for you. It's true. 14 and a half years later, KPCC is now the most listened to public NPR station in the country and one of the two most listened to public radio stations in the country. Thank you. We have the second largest newsroom in Los Angeles and the third largest in Southern California. And we are also the second largest member-supported entity in Southern California. Only PBS SoCal has more member supporters. And for all of you who are supporters of KPCC, thank you so much for making everything that we do possible. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank a couple of people who have been really extraordinary supporters of KPCC and our public service mission. Charlie Wu is a member of the Southern California Public Radio Board of Trustees. Winnie Coe is a member of our Leadership Council. And Bill Kamer is also a member of another Leadership Council. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much for your support. These kinds of forums are absolutely critical to our public service. They allow us to have a dialogue, and they allow you to have an interaction not only with the panelists here, but with one another. And it's engaging these kinds of conversations, I think that's so important. The news and reporting is absolutely critical, but the engagement that you all have, the ideas that you share, and really the friendships and relationships that you build are really what Southern California Public Radio is all about. And again, those of you who've supported KPCC with your membership and your contributions, thank you so much. We very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. I also want a quick thank you to Koji Sakai and the rest of the team here at the Japanese American National Museum for hosting us. They have been absolutely fantastic, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. All right, now all the fun housekeeping. We are live video streaming this event, and we are recording the audio for potential broadcast. So we do ask that you turn your device noises off, but please feel free to leave them on, maybe slightly dimmer screens, and involve yourself in the Twitter conversation, handles and hashtag up there. We will be live tweeting that. We will also be archiving the video from tonight's program, so if you have friends or family or anybody else that wasn't able to make it, please encourage them to check it out at kpcc.org or on the Milken website. And lastly, because I think we've spoken enough, without further ado, please join me in welcoming your moderator for the evening, KPCC senior reporter focusing on housing and changing neighborhoods, Josie Huang.
Hi, everybody. Yes, as John just announced, I'm covering housing for KPCC. It's part of this new initiative we're doing over here where we're really drilling down on specific issues facing Los Angeles. So aside from housing, we're also looking at transportation, the social safety net, but looking at things that are really pressing Los Angeles and Southern California. And it's a new beat, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot tonight as well. And so why don't we just get started and meet our panel of experts. First up, we have Professor Dana Cuff. She teaches architecture and urban planning at UCLA. She's also founding director of UCLA's design think tank, City Lab. She focuses on many issues ranging from affordable housing to suburban studies. So Dana Cuff. Next up, we have Ed DeMarco, who's a senior fellow in residence at the Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets. He's also a visiting professor in Vanderbilt University's Management School. He also, you probably recognize his name from serving as acting director of FHFA, Federal Housing Finance Agency, which regulates Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Thank you, Ed. We also have Larry Gross. Larry is executive director of the Coalition for Economic Survival. It's an advocacy group for tenants that's led the fight for rent control in greater Los Angeles. He also works on preserving affordable housing in LA. So thank you for joining us, Larry.
My pleasure.
Bill Huang is here as well. He's director of housing for the city of Pasadena. In a past life, he oversaw affordable housing and homeless programs in LA County as acting executive director and housing director of the Community Development Commission for the County of Los Angeles. Thanks, Bill. Come here. Last but not least is Jeff Schaffer, Vice President and Southern California Market Leader at Enterprise Community Partners. He works on developing and financing affordable housing throughout the region. So thanks to the whole panel for being here today. Very eclectic group. And thank you guys for joining us tonight for a talk we're calling Priced Out, Can High Density Solve the Affordability Crisis? So density and affordability are two words we're going to be using a lot today. If we wanted to do a drinking game, I'm not, supporting condoning this, but every time you heard the word density tonight, we could do that. Well, let's talk about affordability first, because I think we can say, safely say there's no controversy here. Everybody wants to see more affordably priced housing in the state. Some fresh numbers from the California Association of Realtors here. A recent report from them found that just 30% of households in California can afford to buy a median-priced single-family home, so less than a third of households. If you look at renting, the picture's pretty bad as well. More than one study has found that renters in LA and Orange counties spend nearly half of their income on rent. So affordability, we need it. What's controversial for tonight is the high density part. You often hear people say building more densely will go a long way towards helping California's housing blues, but does dense development always lead to more affordability? And how can you sell people on it, especially living in the land of that promises this dream of the single family home? So we'll get to these questions and more, but very briefly, guys, let's start out by talking about why we're even here tonight, and about why we're even talking about high density. Because how did housing get so unaffordable in Southern California specifically? I mean, wages have not kept up with home prices, but home prices just keep on going up. Does anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll start. Obviously, there's lots of reasons, and I think each of us will contribute different ideas. But from the point of view of someone who's interested in architecture and planning, certainly in Los Angeles, one of the reasons housing prices have gone up so much recently has to do with the fact that we can't sprawl out any further. So it used to be that people went out of the city to look for cheaper and cheaper housing until the point where you were actually, and we have some of the most extreme commutes in the country. Over 90 minutes each way is considered an extreme commute. And I think out of the 10 top, we have 3 of those commuting extremes. So now it's what has been said by one senator, sprawl has hit the wall. Mm-hmm. And that means we have to keep coming back and filling in, and those with the means are taking over those more choice pieces of property.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, California is still one of the most desirable places to live in the country. People want to come here. Developers know if they build, they will come. And so what we're seeing here, though, on the other end of this, we now have the proud distinction of having the highest poverty rate in the nation. 1 out of 4 households are in poverty. And we're in need of 527,000 new affordable units. And over the last years, our rents have gone up 27%, while the income has gone down. Mm-hmm. And there's no leadership in the fact of not only producing new affordable housing, but preserving what we have. And there needs to be that type of marriage to ensure that we can address the affordable housing crisis, because if you don't have preservation with production, you're doomed to a failed housing policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to, Jeff, did you want to add
maybe
something?
at the risk of piling on, we've seen cutbacks in funding for affordable housing at the federal, state, county, city level. Los Angeles has the unfortunate distinction of high-cost cities around the country, maybe being the only city, Denver may be the other one, but they're doing something about this, that doesn't have a local source to fund affordable housing. In Congress today, there are threatened cuts to the HOME program, which is the major funding program at the federal government that supports affordable housing, that would either eliminate the program or take it down to 10% of where it is, so unprecedented further cuts, and it's only going to exacerbate the problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to add to that, our housing trust fund here has been cut by 75%. From $8 million, we're down to $26 million. And so there's not a permanent source of funding to build the affordable housing on the local basis, on the state basis, on the federal basis.
Mm-hmm. And the home cuts would take the 26 down to 2 million.
I wanted to ask Ed, because he brings to this panel a national perspective. Is this something, well, you mentioned Denver also has high home costs as well, but Ed, are we seeing, is it just parts on the West Coast? Are you seeing this as well from the East Coast where you're from? Is this a national issue that we're facing where, just wages aren't keeping up with the home prices?
Well, certainly on a national level, real income for families has been quite stagnant for 12, 15 years now. So that's, in that sense, that's not unique to this area. Real income growth has really been flat for quite a number of years. And so, getting a growth in income would certainly help. There are other parts of the country that also have tough affordability issues. California likes to lead the nation in a lot of things, and so this unfortunately, may be one of them. It's particularly tough here. But the different parts of the country are facing somewhat different housing challenges. In this community where you've continued got robust population growth without much change in supply, other communities are quite different in that way.
Mm-hmm. Bill, I see you nodding, and I also want to maybe help direct some what you're about to say here. I have also heard that, just going back to why maybe LA has some more unique issues. I heard that there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to building in Los Angeles, and seeing if you've got some local and county experience, would you agree with that?
I would say definitely California as a state and Los Angeles County and many of the cities in Los Angeles would be characterized as difficult to develop in areas. There is a lot of regulation, and that does impact the ability to produce housing. But just producing housing doesn't necessarily mean that it is affordable housing. If you look at the high-density housing that's being developed just right around our venue right here. I don't believe, unless the project is actually designed and developed as an affordable housing project, that any of those units are affordable. In fact, many of the construction signs here say, luxury apartments coming, that kind of thing. So I don't think, I think one of the reasons why some of the panelists are talking about the loss of affordable housing dollars is because the private market is not developing affordable housing on its own, and really, I don't think they should be expected to. So they will do it if there's a requirement. I think we'll talk about later about ideas like inclusionary zoning. But other than that, then it's the affordable housing developers that need to have the financing in order to develop the affordable housing.
And we're talking about there being a lack of enough housing. It's not just because we're not building enough new construction. I understand that we also have old housing stock that's falling out. It's no longer available. Can Larry get into that?
Well, not only is the private industry not producing affordable housing, they're contributing to the crisis by knocking down the existing affordable housing. And so we're seeing mass displacement going on in Los Angeles due to state legislation like the Ellis Act, which ties local government's hands from stopping the displacement and eviction of long-term tenants. From 2001 in Los Angeles, we've lost 20,000 rent-controlled affordable units to the Ellis Act, where developers have come in, knocked down the buildings, and built luxury condominiums. And so there needs to be an outcry to change that type of legislation to give local government the ability to address this crisis here at home and not being dictated from Sacramento on how we can address this crisis.
Now, I would just say I think landlords would argue that those numbers represent a small sliver of LA's housing stock, but as you said, it is something that is climbing, and I think grew by more than 200%. More than doubled into the maybe 700s.
Well, it's pretty significant, and the Ellis Act was enacted in 1985 to enable small mom and pops to go out of the business if they couldn't maintain their property. Well, the act has been totally distorted, and we've shown that most of the people who are using the Ellis Act are new developers who have purchased the property and are demolishing it within a year. They're buying the property for the sole purpose of demolishing, kicking out the tenants. We lose the affordable housing, and we displace the tenants. And once those tenants are gone, they're not only gone from their house, they're gone from their neighborhood and from the city and the state.
Okay. Yes, Dana.
Well, I would just say that this is not new to Los Angeles. It's newly present under the circumstances we're feeling now. But in the history of LA, it was either the apartment owners or the federal government, but there's a long history of wiping out affordable neighborhoods, and by that moving primarily people of color outside of the city center in order to have new modern projects. And that has gone on for the entire century. And it's only when it hits a broader population, when it really is felt by the middle class like it is now, that new kinds of subsidies and public housing solutions and affordable housing solutions come about. And in that sense, the fact that the affordability crisis is so widespread, it's a little bit like it was after the Depression, when it really felt like, you know, a third of the nation was ill-housed. That's really the case, and more so now. So there's a constituency for affordable housing and its subsidy that hasn't existed before.
It seems like almost history is repeating itself whenever there is any kind of, dearth of housing supply. We start talking about high density again and building high density. So I don't want to ignore the other equation, other part of this equation, which is high density. And I just am curious, because we have so many different perspectives here. What to you is high density? Is it building up, building wide? Both those things. Anybody want to start?
Well,
I think I'll take it, because before somebody else takes it, I'll take Paris. Paris is high density. Paris has
Paris
higher
too, yeah.
density than Los Angeles by at least 50%, and yet it is seen as a well-regarded city. Now, there are also many high-density cities across the world that are not seen as very desirable cities. But I don't think density in itself is neither the solution for affordable housing, nor is it the great evil that will destroy neighborhoods forever. It has to be done well. It has to be located right. It has to be designed right. It has to be planned out right. And then density can be a very positive thing.
It's interesting that you point out Paris, because it's not known for its high rises, unless you want to count the Eiffel Tower. Everything else is pretty much,
Right.
Pretty low slung, maybe
6 stories or so.
6 stories, and that's density right there. That's one example. Anything else
Well,
come to
I
mind?
don't think that we're going to look like New York. Los Angeles is, I think, a horizontal city, and there's a map that shows you can fit 7 other major cities within the boundaries of Los Angeles, so we really are spread out. But one interesting model that was put forward recently here in Los Angeles in terms of planning that touches on density, just north of downtown, there's an area, the Cornfield Arroyo Seco, that had a specific plan that was developed, and it makes provision for some density. There are many lower income families that live in that neighborhood. There's some industrial uses that there's a desire to preserve, but the Gold Line is running through that neighborhood, and so the term floor area ratio speaks to how much development, how many square feet of development that you can have relative to the total lot size. And in the Cornfield Arroyo Seco plan, it allows for 4-to-1 floor area ratio for if you're building affordable housing. There's an incentive for affordable housing, but still 4-to-1 is not high rise. But that's pretty radical, to get that dense here in Los Angeles, but that's a good model here along a transit corridor.
Is this by Chinatown? Or?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, you can walk right outside this theater, and make a left, and you'll see pretty dense apartment buildings lining Alameda there. And I think that's a good example. And the question is, how many affordable units are in there?
Right.
Density looks very different. You can have a 2-story neighborhood with the same density as a 20-story building, depending on how the open space is distributed. So I think it's really important to think that when we talk about density in Los Angeles, which in my mind, of course we have to become more dense, and we should distribute that density across all neighborhoods in the city. We shouldn't be targeting certain neighborhoods as the ones that could become dense and others that get to stay low density. Every neighborhood council should take its new share of housing. That would be one way of starting to think about how density might be differently distributed, whether it's along corridors, the way it was proposed in the 80s, or whether it's around clusters, the way it was proposed in the 70s, or around transit districts now, which I think almost everyone supports, that you could get higher density nodes there without it imagining that it's going to be all Manhattanized, which is the fearful other that we always seem to hold up as density in Los Angeles. I think no one
That
imagines
used to be a
that's
slogan,
possible.
right? We don't want to be
Don't
like,
Manhattanize LA.
right, right.
If I may, I think Dana's onto an important point there, right? I mean, this is, density does not mean high-rise apartment buildings or only that. I mean, if you have, plots of land in which, it's, had been zoned for, one family for a half acre, and now you have two families on that half acre. You just doubled the density.
right,
It's a 100%
right,
increase
right,
in density.
right.
You take existing properties and you repurpose the property. You infill, where there may be some vacant land or abandoned property. That is enhancing density in an area. So density can mean a wide variety of things, but the economics of what it means, and being the non-Californian here, what strikes me about this, just as a simple matter of economics, is, so if you have this great affordability issue, what is the supply-demand imbalance, and what is the explanation for that? What are the barriers to supply coming on? And if there are barriers to enhancing density, one thing we don't make more of is land, right? So if there are barriers inhibiting more dense development, that is inhibiting supply, which can lead to this kind of imbalance. If I may say one other thing about sort of other parts of the country, there are other parts of the country in which we're seeing much more aggressive movement to density, and it's not just about affordability. Sometimes it's that this is where the market's evolving to. There's market demand for housing that is changing. And it's not just these famous millennials, but the idea of having walkable urban areas, of being able to have mixed use where people don't have to get in a car and get to work. I know that's, a radical thing, I guess, around here, but there's
Wait a second.
there's
I
a
wanna take
lot of
issue with
demand
that.
for that, and there's other metropolitan areas that are much more rapidly evolving in that way.
Well, so wait, but I gave up my parking pass and have a tap card now. Los Angeles is changing, so we are becoming a transit, and I think that we need to take advantage of this. And speaking about density, we have Measure R that passed in 2008. We're seeing an unprecedented build out of our transit system across LA County, maybe more than any place else in the country. You have the city of Los Angeles adopted a plan. It's consolidated plan that dictates its spending of housing and community development dollars, that it's a transit-oriented development consolidated plan. So it's focusing development along transit corridors. And then I think what we additionally have to give attention to is to make sure that as we do that build out, that people of all income levels have an opportunity to live along those transit corridors. And so we need to make sure that we do it in a way that's equitable.
I think
You know,
that's
if-
quite right.
If we shifted the American dream from being the single-family house to having every household have a house, it would be a way of developing options in the residential landscape that would allow for some single-family homes. And there are times in people's lives when they really would like to have a yard. If you have kids, when they're little, it's nice to have a yard if you can afford one. But there are other times that I think almost all of us would be better off living where we're closer to services and living in denser circumstances where you could walk to things. So if we could just remake that magical notion that never really existed in the father knows best model, that we were going to have a single family house with a yard and everybody's going to play nicely with our biological parents, now
Right.
we should have all the household diversity that we have with all the economic diversity we have in houses of some kind. That could be apartments, that could be high-density flats.
Okay.
Well, just if I can add, I think the real question is, what's the purpose of the density you're allowing? And so if you're doing density to ensure affordable housing, you're trying to integrate communities, provide diversity in the communities, I think that's important, and we should look at that. But if it's mere density to make developers richer, I'm not interested in that. And so, one has to look at, interesting fact that in Jordan Downs, which is a large public housing complex here in Watts, very famous. Well, they're doing renovations there, and it's controversial whether the 700 families are going to stay there. Well, what they're going to do is add 700 units of market rate housing, and so and there's something to the fact of you're trying to diversify the income level. But, there's a great need for those 700 units of affordable housing that they're giving to market rate. And my question is, are you then going to build 700 units of affordable housing in Brentwood? Or Pacific Palisades. I mean, if you're going to do this, it should be across the board. And we're not seeing that, and that's the problem.
Okay. Well, I feel like we're dumping on high density a little bit. Just in terms of in relation to developers and making money, but high density has gotten to be a very buzzy word, buzzy term in terms of just fixing the housing crisis here. Some people make the argument that actually, if you build more, you'll have more supply, and you'll meet the demand, and that might bring prices down. I see you guys shaking.
Yeah, I think that if we look at history, so local governments develop a regional housing needs assessment where they come to some consensus on what the need is for affordable housing, and it's something that the city of Los Angeles took into consideration when they developed a housing element, a plan for the city. And tracking performance from 2006 to 2012, we saw that the city generated about 80% of the market rate housing that was needed, but less than 20% of the low and very low income housing that was needed, and less than 1% of the moderate level housing. So if we just leave it to market forces, we're going to see pretty much as much market rate housing as we need and a dismal performance in terms of housing for low income people.
Actually, when you combine the very low, and moderate income, our needs were only 12%. We needed to build something like 70,000 units, and we only built 7,000 or something like that. So the market's going to take care of itself as far as the high end. Our focus needs to be on the affordable units.
So what I'm hearing from you guys about the market is that there's just not enough incentives for developers to build affordably priced housing for low to moderate income folks, right? Because we've talked about how expensive home prices are in Los Angeles or Southern California. I imagine it's very expensive to buy land, to develop housing. I mean, what's in it for a developer, I guess, to build affordable housing? Is this something you can fault them for not doing?
Right. No, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that they would do something other than try to maximize the value of the asset that they have, which is the land. And the irony, high density housing, I think most people would agree, most planners would agree that it works best close to high quality transit, close to job centers, that's really where it works best. But when the public sector invests in a transportation in the transportation infrastructure, like a light rail station, that's a huge public investment there. Typically, it goes along with upzoning of the surrounding property in order to create higher densities, so that those riders who would support the public transportation live right around there. The irony, though, is that when the land gets upzone to allow higher density, the price of the land, the value of the land also skyrockets. And so if the developers are coming in and they're buying very high priced land, it's not reasonable to expect that they would then, out of the goodness of their heart, develop low cost housing. No, they have to develop high cost housing to meet their costs and to meet their margin.
What do you think about value capture kinds of strategies? I mean, there are other places, like when Central Park was built in New York, all the land value went up all around it. And not to capture that value by virtue of the people who built the park is lost income. So in Chicago, when they improved Millennium Park, they actually developed systems by which the city would get back some of the money that was increased by property values from the improvement of the park. It would seem like a value capture along all of our new transit would make a way to start funding public or affordable housing again.
I mean, certainly that there could be the property taxes get generated, and some of that comes back to the local government.
Yeah.
There could be assessments. There could be fees, linkage fee, for instance, right? The new development creates a demand for housing, therefore there should be a fee to offset the housing. But I just want to say, the irony of what happens, and I think is what's happening here in LA, is that the high density housing that gets developed around the light rail stations to produce a market, a captive market that will use it. High income households are the households that tend not to use public transportation, and the population segment that we really want to get close to the infrastructure investments are low-income households, low to moderate-income households, and that would have to be a requirement. That is something like an inclusionary housing requirement, which would say if any developer is developing a multifamily building, a percentage of it needs to be set aside for low or moderate-income households, and there are well over 100 jurisdictions in California that have inclusionary ordinance. There are 11 cities out of the 88 in LA County that have inclusionary ordinances. So inclusionary ordinances could work. There's an issue with some lawsuits, one that was against inclusionary housing, one that went for inclusionary housing. So what really needs to happen is there needs to be a statewide fix that says that clarifies that jurisdictions, if they so decide, can implement a local ordinance that requires housing, a local inclusionary housing ordinance.
What Bill didn't mention is Pasadena has a very strong, it sounds like, inclusionary zoning law. Can you, and just one of the few, I think, in LA County?
One of 11.
One of 11.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how that's helped in terms of bringing high-density housing to Pasadena?
Right. So the trade-off with developers is, yes, you have to provide these affordable units, but you also get more density. So they get to build more units, and so they have a financial offset for building the affordable units. In Pasadena, the inclusionary ordinance created several hundred units of low and moderate income and very low and moderate income housing without any local subsidy, and which is wonderful. And we have still several hundred more units in the pipeline right now, some of which are being built right now, that will also add to that. But the beauty of an inclusionary ordinance is that it geographically distributes the housing. It provides the low-income housing in the best places, the places where the market really deems to be, the best places to develop, and that's where you get your affordable housing. And so that's one of the great benefits of an inclusionary ordinance. So if it's done right, there could be benefits to the developer to actually get it done, and it can be a kind of win-win situation.
I would just add, though, I think everyone agrees it's the very low and low income housing that's going to be the hardest to produce. I think there's probably a lot of people in the audience who think of themselves as like working away, middle class, and still can't afford anything. And there are developer solutions that are emerging that are high density solutions there, and largely they resort to very small square footages. So if you look at the big Santa Fe project that was built next to SciArc, it's what's called micro units, and they are something like 250 to 350 square feet. Now that's the size, 400 square feet is the size of a two-car garage. And really, if it's designed well, it were affordable, which a lot of those units still aren't very cheap, but they are better for entry level than practically anything else. That's not an unlivable amount of space. I think we all have to kind of shift the way we think about the range of options that are available. So very small market rate units could be a help in the overall affordability for some households, not for all of them. But I see that as actually a promising direction.
Right, something that developers would like because you get more bang for your buck. I mean, just more units out of.
And usually there's an inclusionary component to it because they're building so much. So you actually then can get some more affordable. But just to find the kind of housing that would allow you to get into the rental market for people at almost every income level until you get to the highest income level, which given our income disparities is almost all of us, means that affordability isn't just a problem of somebody else. So really we have a very bad history in Los Angeles of the politics of density and affordable housing. And that has contributed to our problem. Nobody wanted it in their neighborhood, even though it was them that would qualify. Right? I mean, I would go to community meetings and say, well, we're going to be able to build some more affordable housing. And say, we don't want that in our neighborhood. And say, well, actually, you're eligible for it. So, maybe it would work out because it's really us that needs this.
Well, I hear you about micro units, but that only works. You mentioned entry level. What about for families? Because where you need
That's
to fit
not
a
right for families.
Not yeah. I mean, I'm sure some families have tried doing that, but in very small spaces. But for families with like three, 4, or 5 people households, affordable housing is, I understand, pretty costly to build because another reason for why maybe developers avoid it, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles, conditions you need to meet, and you have to build bigger, which again, you don't get as much bang for your buck if you're the developer, right? Am I right in thinking that it's more costly to build affordable housing?
Well, I'm not sure if it's more costly, but I think that you're right, that we have to figure out, especially in an environment where many of the funding sources are constrained or disappearing, we have to figure out how we can develop affordable housing less expensively. So Enterprise has been doing a study series that we've called Bending the Cost Curve, and looking at how can we achieve efficiencies, both in terms of cost and the permitting and siting of affordable housing. How can we share best practices and across the country and bring them into different neighborhoods? That is part of the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how affordable housing development, like 100% affordable housing projects are developed, the financing is very very complex. Multiple layers of financing. The approval process is very difficult. Typically, you have neighborhood opposition that needs to be overcome, and in many cases that I've seen, part of what is done to gain acceptance of the community is to give away some density. So you could have built 50 units, but you agreed to build 40 units to get it make it acceptable. I know a case in East LA, right across the street from a transit line. A 4-story building was too high, so they built a 3-story building when it was right across the street from a brand new transit stop. It's unfortunate to give away development like that. I mean, affordable housing like that. But affordable housing also tends to have more amenities, community rooms, computer labs, case management spaces. So and also to gain acceptance in the community, oftentimes the affordable housing design is at a much higher level. The aesthetics is at a much higher level than a market rate apartment building. And so there are a lot of reasons why affordable housing units end up costing a lot to actually build.
Sorry,
And
I see Larry one.
I would totally agree with that. I think that the best affordable housing that's being built are by the nonprofit developers who have a mission to provide affordable housing, and we should do everything in our power to support it. Government should do everything in their power to provide the needed funds to the nonprofits. On the other hand, the for-profit developers, there's not a mission to provide affordable housing. It's just a way to either get more units, and then you see the impact of they have on neighborhoods is to help to exacerbate gentrification. So it has a ripple effect. So I'll give you an example. So last Thursday, to put it in perspective of what people are actually seeing out there, at least this is what we're seeing in Los Angeles. Last Thursday evening, I visited with some tenants in the Pico La Cienega area, 16 units. These are mainly seniors. They've lived there for 10, 20 years. They're single head of households. Their children have left. They're retired. They got notice that they're going to be displaced for a new project. It's a block where there's no parking. What they're going to be replaced with was 34 units and only 3 affordable units. So that's the density. So we end up having a net loss of 13 affordable units. And that's what we're seeing from the private developer throughout Los Angeles, and it's increasing. And so we need to address that issue of curbing that type of development that really doesn't contribute. It actually contributes to our affordable housing crisis. It helps to displace communities and displace low-income communities, communities of color, all for the expense of getting more profits for the developers.
Yeah, I want to pull back a little bit. And I was actually going to turn to you about.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, rather than, is there a way of framing this issue rather than as a sort of zero-sum game between developers and affordable families needing affordable housing, is there a way to think about the challenge as one where, through an alignment of incentives, including financial incentives and opportunity, that a more of a win-win outcome can be done? I mean, what I'm hearing just from listening to the conversation is that there are challenges, not just with regard to sort of private developers, but really in terms of both state and local governments, in terms of the rules, the restrictions, the costs that are involved. And is there, if we could reframe the questions in a way that we tried to make this more of a win-win, why wouldn't a developer who wants to make money want to develop housing if they look at a community and see there's a great deal of demand for housing in this community? So why aren't they doing it? And can we, as I say, can this simply be recast in a way that creates a better opportunity for the market to actually help provide solutions? But the government, has got to look at its own policies and question whether how much they're assisting and how much they're actually hindering, the solutions coming forward.
And I think there's an opportunity to do that. I mean, I think that like the state density bonus law that says, you get a certain amount of density if you have a certain amount of affordable units. I think that's trying to get at that balance. I think, an opportunity that we have right now, if, we want to push for some housing solutions, I mean, we can maybe couple together something like, a statewide inclusionary fix along with some CEQA reform, something that removes some of the barriers.
Just explain CEQA.
So the California Environmental Quality Act, and it is something that originally was supposed to provide, environmental protections, but it is oftentimes, if you talk to developers, they would say, well, it's a tool that people use to unfairly block development or extend the timeline that it takes to develop projects. So they kind of abuse that. So is there a way to reform CEQA so that it does what it was intended to do, but doesn't give the opportunity for somebody to abuse it and increase the cost of development? So there could be some, we could remove some barriers, work together with the developers. So on the one hand, let's work for some regulatory reform for more housing, affordable housing, and then also something to remove some of the barriers to allow for more production of housing overall. And can I just talk one great example is, in 1999, there was almost no housing here in downtown LA. Maybe, I think, about 10,000 units of housing in downtown LA, mostly senior housing, that kind of thing. The city adopted the city realized that there was a tremendous amount of housing opportunity that didn't require building anything new, no new buildings, and that was, they adopted the adaptive reuse ordinance here in the city of Pasadena, which enabled these loft housing conversions to make sense. So they, if you came down here in 1999, you walked down Broadway, the first floor retail was buzzing, was happening above, all the floors above, almost all of them were either completely vacant or highly, highly underutilized. And it didn't make sense for anybody to try to convert them into anything because the city's requirements were so onerous. They had onerous parking requirements, they had onerous seismic requirements, fire exiting requirements, which couldn't be met in these old, mostly historic buildings that were already there. And so the city came up with a very flexible ordinance that allowed them to be adaptively reused. And as a result, the first loft housing project happened, which was the old Bank District project, and that proved that there was a strong market for there's a strong residential housing demand for downtown LA, and the next project proved there was more demand, and then pretty soon, all of these buildings, these residential units were developed in these existing buildings without building anything new. And so we have the opportunity actually today. You know what housing that we have that is highly underutilized? Our single-family neighborhoods.
Right.
Our single-family neighborhoods. A lot of single-family neighborhoods, single-family homes, the people who live in the single-family homes are way overhoused. How many people do we know where there's one person living in a 3-bedroom house or in a 4-bedroom house.
That's actually the most common household type now, is the single person. And that's also bred the Airbnb phenomenon, where people are trying to gain a little income from that house. And our housing stock is so inflexible that we can only figure out how to do that by renting a room from the inside.
So if
from
there
the
could be
couch.
an accessory dwelling unit, a very flexible accessory dwelling unit or second unit, or what's called granny flat ordinance, but very flexible to allow existing homes to be potentially subdivided.
I feel like this is the segue into
Yeah,
my
Yeah, and so
terrain.
Well,
that was a segue
yeah.
to you, Dana. So all right,
Dana's
so-
like standing alert now.
But it's not only the interesting ideas of building a new unit, but actually even subdividing an existing house that has gotten too big for the owner.
Right, and I want to say too, I mean, I actually did a story recently about this program that lets, you mentioned like single seniors rent out a room in their house because
Exactly.
they're living by themselves. And if more seniors did that, actually, thousands of units would actually come online. And that's
Without
another,
building anything new.
without, yeah, and providing some company and someone to drink tea with. That's
right.
So that adaptive reuse ordinance, I think, is a beautiful example in Los Angeles of what happens when you remove some of the friction for creating new housing possibilities. And that's what the state bill 1866 did for granny flat units. And in fact, there have been a few new developments that have happened north of LA that build 2 units together, because it's legal now by state law, unless cities get in the way of it, to build a second unit on any single family home's lot. And when you think about it, in Los Angeles, there are 500,000 single family homes just in the city of LA, and all of them have some free land that doesn't cost anything more, right in the backyard. And when you look at different neighborhoods, it's already happening everywhere, illegally, but it's the way affordability has been adapted, whether it's in a garage or a room rented out or separating off part of the house. And if we make the friction for doing that go away, it would unleash a lot of already affordable possibilities. It's not the only answer, but it's certainly, like the adaptive reuse, one that could meet the mayor's goal of 100,000 units if just 20% of the lots got a single-family
well,
house.
let's show people what we're talking about here because.
Well, this is one idea.
Okay, well, here we go. This is what Dana's doing over at her think tank with her students and architects.
Photograph, not Photoshop.
Yeah, and maybe you can, I don't know if you can, don't
Well,
crank your neck too much, but you can explain to people what we're seeing here.
Yeah, and really this is just a provocation as much as anything, a conceptual provocation that to build in your backyard can be done. We built this over 4 days with completely unskilled labor, that is UCLA students.
Yes.
I don't know if any of them are out there. I apologize. You worked really, really hard. 2 people can carry every part of this down a side yard. It pops into place. There's a really beautiful time-lapse photography image of building it on the website. And it could look many, many different ways. We joke that this is the fizzy. You could also get the flat version. But the idea is that it would be extremely environmentally performative, because if we're going to build in our backyards today, first of all, we should be getting rid of that grass already, right? So we should partner with the turf terminators and get a one-stop shop with the solar city people. And basically, we could power our front houses with our new back houses. We could get a more effective environmental biome where you could grow your own vegetables and eat your garden instead of sit on the lawn, and you'd have your people housed in the same amount of square footage as that garage that is there in some people's backyards. So this is slightly smaller than a 2-car garage, and I think most people who come to it, it's still up on the UCLA campus until about September 10th. You walk in and you think, I could live here. And one of the things that I think is amazing about it, we should have 10 different designs for this, all of which meet those same qualities of high environmental performance and high green and habitability qualities.
So
One of
Dana-
the things that's true is that I think everybody has a story for how they would live in their
That's what I was gonna
backyards.
Well, I think part of where this conversation points is that we're having is that we have a lot of ideas in terms of solutions. And so whether it's through design innovation, planning and zoning changes, if it's a mix of subsidies, incentives, requirements, what we really need is some kind of a comprehensive plan that ties all of these together. And fundamentally, we need a societal commitment that every person in our community deserves a
Yeah.
decent, safe, and sanitary place to live. And then if we have the buy-in of citizens, government, business, philanthropy to advance that mission, then we can get to solution.
Right. I mean, even something like this, like the buy home, as it's called, it's perfectly legal to cite something like that in Los Angeles. But aren't there certain conditions you have to meet? Like, do you have to provide extra parking?
Right. There are in the way of putting in your second unit requirements, some of which are necessary, whether that's safety or privacy or density issues that would be related to infrastructure, but some of which are really just there as obstacles. And we can work with and are working with the Recode LA, which is trying to change the zoning in Los Angeles to remove some of the ridiculous friction that you can't, for instance, put one on an alley because you have to have a larger backing area. I mean, there's no reason for some parts of the restrictions that prevent some lots from getting these.
So Dana's idea is the idea that time may have come, because just yesterday, LA City Council member Gil Cedillo, who's the chair of the Housing Committee, introduced a motion to explore the secondary house in the back. So we may be seeing this advance.
I've talked to the mayor's office, and they're certainly aware of buy home. And this actually makes me think, like, if something like, there you were concerned about gentrification and like how high density can change a neighborhood. Something like this, you probably couldn't even see from outside. Though, you would have more people, probably the need for more parking, some traffic, right? Though I know in your perfect world, people would all, they wouldn't be
Cycle.
relying on their car so much. But is this like a happy medium of getting density without upsetting people's sensibilities?
If you speak to a lot of neighborhood associations, they would say absolutely not. This is, and if you ask a lot of local politicians, they would consider this ordinance, a second unit ordinance, as a kind of a third rail politically, because there is such an overreaction and a misconception that if there is a workable second unit ordinance that actually produces second unit ordinances, that it'll convert all single family neighborhoods into rental neighborhoods, and it's not true.
It's interesting that there's no constituency, and it's a really good point. And it's one of the problems of our achieving greater affordabilities is because we don't have constituencies to stand for new forms of affordability. So one of the things they did in San Diego to make these possible was they promised that there would never be more than 10% of the lots in any neighborhood that would get them. And it took away that fear that everybody was going to be adding them, and you'd have people looking over your back fence, and strangers would be living back there, not your grandmother, which it turns out it is someone in your family. And they never hit the 10% mark, and people started feeling really positively about it. And so it made it possible to start. And so I would say, while we're waiting for that huge change of heart, which I also think we should have, I want to build a few demonstrations so that we remove the fear of these things. So I think we have to approach it from both ends. Small implementations where we see demonstrations that we can live differently, and it's actually wonderful, and then use that as a means for social change and attitude change. But we really need to try some things and do some pilots.
I think that there are cities already who have actually tried to use a very progressive and a very flexible, even an incentivized second unit ordinance to produce affordable housing. So there's and they've been around for a while. City of Santa Cruz is one of them. Actually offering incentives, actually waiving fees. Making it as easy as possible to, instead of as difficult as possible, making it as easy as possible to build a second unit And so I think that there's enough history there that we can look at that. Somebody could look at that, research that, and see what was the impact, how many actually got built. Somebody still has to pay for the thing. So it's not like the ordinance gets adopted and everybody is going to go out and have one tomorrow. You still got to pay for this thing,
You know,
and it
we've
still is
just had
expensive.
such a conservative, deadening attitude about how we buy houses. I mean, the mortgage system broke in 2008, and we didn't reinvent it. And that seems strange to me. Why shouldn't we be able to buy something like this, like we buy a car? Why isn't there a program where you put something down and there's a lender that's sitting right there and they figure it out for you? And basically, you could recycle the whole thing just like you do your car when it's 10 years old.
I know the perfect person to ask. He's sitting right next to you, former head of FHFA.
Fannie Mae v. version 2. This is going to
What do
be
you
the
think, Ed?
new
Well, that's a
version 5.
stimulating question. Look, I mean, so if you think about traditional mortgage lending, though, it's on fixed collateral, right? And so the collateral is not the basis for the loan. It should be the borrower's ability to repay is what is the key characteristic about making a loan. But a lender is making a long-term, highly leveraged commitment to an individual or a family when they purchase the home. And so the collateral value and the sustainability of that collateral value matters a lot when one's looking at mortgage lending. If you talk about, Dana, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, but if this is a depreciating asset in the sense of it has a much different economic life than the fixed thing does, then you may not be in the traditional realm of mortgage lending. And the closest parallel I can point to that is certain manufactured housing that is, the technical term is chattel loans. What that means is that it's not on fixed property where the buyer owns the underlying land on which this sits, and that's a different credit market than traditional mortgage lending. But what I hear you saying is, okay, fine, then what is sort of a credit market solution that can help bring financing to it? It may not be the traditional mortgage market, but that just begs the question, all right, well, what is a suitable credit market that can provide financing for something like this? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to take away the mortgage and the way people build wealth in their homes. That's works out well for some part of the population, and it's a smaller and smaller portion. But there should be other ways to finance housing besides a permanent land solution that go along with ideas of more temporary solutions, of recyclable solutions. I mean, the mobile home solution is sort of right, but usually when those things are done, boy, you can't recycle many pieces of that except for in a waste system. I mean, if we built houses in a way that you actually could take the frame down when your, grandma died or college kid finally got the job or kid grew up or something, you could collapse it, sell it on Craigslist, and you wouldn't need the value built into the land. It would be built into the thing just like your car is. I mean, my car's not as good as it was when it was built in 2007, but it's not worth nothing, and I've gotten a lot of value out of it.
Well, then maybe auto lending becomes
I think it's a very good model.
model to be looking at than a traditional mortgage.
Can I ask you, Ed, from your perspective, from your perch, FHFA, have people's attitudes towards home buying, or what is a home, changed over the years? Are people less, when they think of having a home, it's not necessarily a standalone house. Have you seen those changes?
I have, and I think we're seeing it nationwide. The home ownership rate in this country was very constant for about 50, 60 years. It was just under 2/3 of American families were homeowners. And what happened just before the financial crisis is, we made credit much easier, we did a lot of things, and we saw that home ownership rate get up to just about 70, and it came crashing down. We damaged millions of families along the way. We destroyed a lot of wealth, and we've ended up back at a home ownership rate today of about 64. So we're kind of back where we started from, maybe even a little less. I think looking out into the future, a lot of people, and I wouldn't count myself among this, expect that the home ownership rate may be a bit lower than in the past. But I want to distinguish the home ownership rate from the ever homeowner, because people may become homeowners a little later in life than they used to. They may get as they age, they may want a different solution than being a homeowner and maintaining a home. And so that's going to affect the home ownership rate, but it may not affect the percentage of families that over the course of a life cycle are homeowners. And so this gets, in a different way, it's coming at what Dana's saying, is that as you think about sort of longer lives and the evolution of family structures, we may see a different pattern emerge in terms of when people are actually homeowners and what sort of housing they're looking for in various stages of their life.
I've heard, folks who are interested in living near transit hubs can range from, of course, the famous millennials, but also, seniors who are downsizing and want easy access to transportation, to, in walkable neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got, aging baby boomers that are reaching retirement, but they're also either are or are soon to be empty nesters, and so they're thinking about downsizing. They're thinking about, locational changes. Not all of them. I mean, the majority probably will stay in the house that they've been in, but there's enough of a change going on that this is also having an effect in urban areas around the country where we're seeing people in their 50s and 60s and 70s looking to urbanize more. They want to be able to walk to the local restaurants and grocery stores and so forth, and so it's changing housing patterns in certain parts of the country.
So I just don't think that's our reality here in Los Angeles. I think we're the flip of that in the fact that 64% of the people who live in Los Angeles are renters. This is a city of renters, and many of the people in those homes will never reach that American dream of owning their own home. And so they're just trying to stay and keep the roof over their heads. And there's a tremendous pressure. And I think, what Jeff pointed to is really what we need to look at. We can't look at these things piecemeal because they all interact with each other, and we need a overall housing policy. And the fact is we're never going to build our way out of this affordable housing crisis if we're not preserving what we have and we're just building on top of that. We're ending up with a net loss of affordable housing. And so there needs to be an aggressive plan here to keep what we have but build a lot more. And so as far as incentives, I would support incentives if we can push that development and then density onto vacant land, on commercial land. I think that's all to the good. But if they start taking our existing affordable housing and disrupting people's lives and destroying communities, that's something we should say absolutely no to.
Yeah, you do hear that a lot in Los Angeles about how you need to not only build, I heard this before from, I think, city officials, you can't build yourself out of this housing crisis, but you need to preserve what's out there because there are quite a number of affordable housing units in the city for which the affordable housing covenants are expiring. And I understand the city is working towards trying to, or at least in some districts, trying to extend those contracts.
Well, we're facing the possibility of losing 15,000 government-assisted housing in the next 4 years. 5,000 are the CRA units that are spread out through the city, and when those expire, there's not much protection. Another 10,000 are the HUD-subsidized housing units, which are spread out throughout the city. They were built in the 60s and 70s. They were a way to integrate communities. Those units you can protect. The tenants have protection, and a lot of investment should go into preserving those units, because if we lose them, we will never get them back because there's not the support in Washington to build it. And so they're lost, tenants are lost, and we're going to suffer, and it increases our housing crisis.
Well, in terms of other ways possibly to, I'm just switching back to maybe building more housing. Is there a way to look at our suburban areas, in the so-called urbanization of our suburban areas? I think we talked a little bit about the backyard homes, but I mean, I think in other parts of the country, maybe Ed, you can speak to this. Aren't other places more, I guess, on the leading edge of maybe changing the zoning in their suburban areas, looking at the single-family home zone and trying to maybe put in at least low density, change it to low density zoning?
Right. So certainly there are metropolitan areas that are working on turning parts of what we used to traditionally think as the suburb into a much more urban area. Oftentimes that revolves around something Jeff talked about earlier in the conversation about transportation. So in my hometown area of Washington, D.C., where you have a subway system that reaches out into the suburbs, we've seen a number of communities that used to be sort of traditional suburbs where land use ordinances have been changed to allow for the replacement of single-family stock with greater density, with much more mixed-use development that takes place around it. So we've seen businesses actually come out into the suburbs, and so we've turned this, what had been just a bedroom communities into areas that have businesses, they have thriving commercial activity, but they also have a great deal of residential use. There is more of a tendency to using what we were talking earlier about inclusionary zoning, so that there's requirements for affordable units to be made part of that. And what we've seen is the property values and so forth are going up because there's a great deal of demand for that. Folks are finding that to be a very attractive living. It has sort of compressed the square footage of different families, but that lowers the environmental impact and some other things as well.
But we have to be thoughtful where development happens. I mean, we all know how difficult traffic is in Los Angeles. We were worried if Dana was going to get here from UCLA on time tonight, coming across town. But I think build out along the new transit corridors really provides an opportunity. And as advocates, we've had some victories. And so this year, Metro, our regional transit agency, adopted a policy of committing to for the housing that gets built on Metro-owned land on these corridors, that they're looking for 35% affordability. That's a great victory. We have a grassroots advocacy group called ACT LA, which is advocating for a citywide transit ordinance that would speak to how we can incent development along transit, including ensuring that there is not only affordable housing, but access to healthy foods and education. And so the build out of the transit system is a great opportunity, and it does run all over the county, and so it does create opportunity to spread that growth.
Of the transit that's already been built right now, not all of the stops are actually transit-oriented districts. There's or successful transit-oriented districts. So there's still a lot of development capacity in the line that exists right now, and you think about down the blue line, for instance, and the gold line that's being extended out to Azusa right now. I mean, that's going into 6 different cities. I don't know if there is much housing planned around any of those stops. I suspect there's probably some maybe around the Monrovia station, but I don't know about the rest. And I don't know if any of that would be affordable.
Maybe it's coming, but I wonder, is there anywhere, I think we've talked about transit hubs and I guess maybe transportation corridors, large boulevards, that's probably another place you could do high density housing. Anywhere else you would think would work? Because we see a lot of resistance when you're kind of edging into more single family home territory, right? Because I know this whole thing about the single family home and the California dream may or may not be a myth, but there is a lot of NIMBYism that goes on with high density housing that goes up. And I mean, you mentioned that traffic comes along with it, and there's going to be parking issues. I mean, can you blame folks for worrying about high density housing coming in, and maybe they're probably worried about their property values as well?
It doesn't need to be like a big blanket of density that just lays out over the entire landscape. And I think from the very beginning, Los Angeles has separated itself from other city forms by saying we have many centers. That's been part of the polynucleated clusters. We've had different names for it over different times, but it's in those other downtowns, the neighborhoods, whether it's Santa Monica or Culver City or Venice or Larchmont or North Hills, all of those have their own kind of centers, and it's there that we should be increasing density, increasing affordability, making it more walkable. And as we saw in our one neighborhood downtown, which is just slightly bigger than some of our other neighborhoods, it actually worked, right? It's packed with people walking dogs. There's a Starbucks in every Starbucks practically now. And really the livability of that was just an option that finally was available to people who didn't want to live like stuck in a single family house. So I'm all for people who still want to and can afford their single family homes. But we've all of us been stuck with that. Like, how do you run an office out of the kid's bedroom model? Right? It just doesn't work. We all need more flexibility, and there are plenty of places where that could be placed well, as long as we don't think of it as something that's going to happen everywhere. Right. Now, in this larger question, like, how do we make a massive plan of that sort? I still think now large-scale infrastructure, look at the high-speed rail, for example, something that I think really should happen, but it's very difficult to make that happen in Los Angeles or in the state, because big infrastructure, big solutions, people are really wary of them because they haven't worked out that well in the past. So we need to have a big solution that has local implementation, and that needs to be distributed equitably across. So if we say, all right, each neighborhood has to increase its current housing stock by 20% or 500 units, depending on which comes first, or some kind of model so that those neighborhoods that are already super dense don't get an extra load, but those places that are always very effective at the NIMBY get some. Then I think we start to have a large solution that can be unevenly applied.
Is that politically viable? Do you guys see something like that being able to work for this area?
Well, I mean, difficult politically, but there are developments at the national level that are pushing this agenda, and so there has been a recent Supreme Court ruling, and now HUD has come out with regulations, and it is this tongue twister around affirmatively furthering fair housing. But basically, what it says is it's that yes, we can invest dollars in revitalizing communities, but at the same time, we have to give lower income people an opportunity to move to better communities and to be doing both. And so I think that we're going to see a push of finding this balance between redevelopment, but also fair housing, and how do we balance those agendas? But it may provide a hammer in a way when we talk about inclusionary zoning to say, yes, this is a tool that we need to make sure that affordable housing is going into some of those upper income communities.
Well, I think one of the, there definitely is a role for the state to sort of provide the helps that local jurisdictions need, like if they clear up the inclusionary housing, conundrum right now and say, yes, local jurisdictions do have the ability to adopt a inclusionary ordinance. There's the state density bonus, there's the second unit ordinance. There's lots of examples. One of the big wins I think recently are the cap and trade dollars. So there's a new cap and trade program here. A big chunk of that money is used for affordable housing.
Along transit lines, transit hubs.
Well, yeah. Affordable housing that reduces vehicle miles traveled, which the easiest way to do it is put it very close to transit, just to locate your property, someplace that is transit rich. So that's incentivizing, that's providing a financial tool. So those things can help, but there are 88 cities plus unincorporated areas here in the County of Los Angeles. The County of Los Angeles is very, very diverse, and so it is difficult to get everybody to do their fair share on things that they don't like. It's like saying, the homeless numbers in LA County have gone up. Now every community needs to do their fair share. That's not going to work. I mean, we wish it would work, but it doesn't work. So I think the housing crisis is so severe right now, and as Dana had mentioned, I mean, it affects everybody. We need to implement whatever we can, and all of these things. Right. Density being one of them, inclusionary ordinance, regulatory reform, second units, ordinances of home sharing.
Someone needs to be writing all this down. Yeah.
New financing, permanent sources for financing. I mean, all of these things need to be implemented. And the last thing I would mention is that, there is affordable housing, some affordable housing in Los Angeles, and it's hard to find. But it's very hard to find. And so one of the things
and there's wait lists, right? I mean,
oh yeah, there's a lot of wait lists. But one of the things that LA County did a number of years ago was they created a free housing search database called housing.lacounty.gov, or the County Housing Resource Center. And it allows you to search in a very powerful way for different types of housing, and all the units that are listed there on that website are at moderate income, affordable to moderate income and below. And it's not like a list of here's a bunch of affordable housing projects. Because if people who come in looking for housing, if I give them a list of affordable housing projects, they're going to start calling down the list. And by the time they get to the 20th one and have been told there's no vacancies and the waiting list is closed, they're going to think this list is no good. So this database, actually, the property owners have control when to list their units and when to take them off. And so these units, the listings change all the time. And there are thousands of units listed every single day throughout LA County on that website. So, helping people to find the existing units is another way that we can help with affordable housing.
Well, we have to do all what he said.
Yeah, we do
But
all
we
that.
have to do it in a smart way and a realistic way. That's because for every action, there's going to be a reaction. And so Dana mentioned downtown and how it's thriving, and there's Starbucks downtown now. Well, what do we see is now there's an attack on Skid Row of trying to move out the homeless because the people downtown don't want to see the homeless. Report just came out this week from Economic Roundtable that said we have 13,000 new homeless on our streets every month. And so what it seems our policy is doing is moving people from rent to tents. You also did a story on the Section 8 program. So we have 8,000 people on the Section 8 waiting list. They've been waiting there for 10 years. The list has been closed for 15 years. The the Section 8 director said if they opened up the list, they can anticipate 700,000 eligible people signing up. So the need is there. What we should be doing is declaring a state of emergency on affordable housing. And every body of our government, every organization needs to focus on it. I mean, this is a real crisis. I mean, we're talking here about little here, there, and everywhere. But this is far beyond the magnitude that we can ever imagine, and we need to get serious and call and sound the bell and the horn, and people need to go into action. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse, and it is getting worse as we sit here.
Ed, as you're listening to this, I mean, are you hearing this conversation anywhere else? Is California or Southern California a special animal here?
I think Southern California may stand out a bit in terms of the difficulty of developing land and increasing supply. But the other thing that's striking me, and I say this as a non-Californian, I mean, I really don't know, but I hear and I can appreciate the challenge of 88 different sort of cities or communities, and I wonder again, how does one turn that challenge into an opportunity to sort of approach this differently? The one thing that I'm not quite hearing in this discussion is where's the business community? Forget the politics and the politicians for a minute. There's a business community out here that I presume needs workers, including, across an income stream. They need customers. And so it seems to me as though the business community ought to have a stake in the solution as well, because they want to be able to attract and retain workers. They want to be able to attract and retain customers. And if this housing challenge in Los Angeles is inhibiting their ability to grow, what is their role in the partnership here? And in fact, if you've got 88 or more different sort of jurisdictions that can be looked to, then you can localize and customize around what's the labor demand, the business and commercial activity in that particular area, and where are they in terms of being brought into the discussion, because they've got a stake in the outcome too, and that might help overcome certain of the political challenges if you've got the business community behind wanting to see things that are going to help their area grow.
Right.
Yeah,
Just to reinforce it, not that long ago, maybe 6 months ago, there was a LA Times in-depth interview with an angel investor, investing in these startup tech companies here in LA. Long interview. Very last question was, what could we do to help to support the tech startups? He said, provide housing, provide affordable housing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a problem for LA in terms of being able to recruit talent. And I remember just speaking to UCLA professors saying that they are maybe missing out on some professors who are getting offers from somewhere else, but that they want to be able to buy a home, and they're not going to be able to do that. If they go somewhere else, they can. And also in another high-priced market is San Francisco, you hear about how they have trouble recruiting teachers. So it's affecting their school system as well.
Well,
Go
I mean,
ahead, Jeff.
no doubt business could do more, but I want to give credit where credit's due. So 2 places where business has weighed in a positive way. One, LA Business Council is a progressive business voice in the city. Each year they host a mayoral summit on housing, jobs, and transportation, and they've been very strong advocates around raising the minimum wage and providing affordable housing. So that's one good voice. Second, Home for Good is our local movement to address homelessness. And you had this unusual suspects of United Way, where it's, I think, a lot of business people, and the LA Chamber of Commerce step forward to try and push for solutions to homelessness in Los Angeles. And we have a long way to go, but the federal government was looking at Los Angeles as an outlier and basically challenged the city and said, if you don't step up and show that you're doing something locally, the federal government's not going to step in to provide their support. And LA stepped up, and we have had that commitment of support from the federal government. So the one, I think, bright spot is we are making progress towards solving veterans' homelessness. Maybe not by December, but maybe in the not distant future, but we still have very big challenges
And
there.
Jeff, your organization, Enterprise, is working with the city and private financing to, the city's leveraging its money to be able to get more financing for affordable housing as well. Is that right?
Right, but I mean, we do come back to when you mentioned the city and leverage. I mean, yes, we can leverage dollars, but there is that need for that initial bit of subsidy from sources like the City of Los Angeles and other public agencies, which we can then use to leverage multiple times of private dollars.
So you guys, we're running out of time for this part. We're going to take questions from the audience very shortly, but I wonder, what do you guys think 50 years from now? Are we still going to be having panels like this? Are we still going to be dealing with the affordability crisis? And by then, will people have become more receptive to high density? Or will the topography of LA look different?
Well, yeah. I think that if action isn't going to take, and we're going to see this become really a city, a tale of two cities, of the very rich and the very poor. And you alluded to the fact of, attracting people, workers here. And so what we're seeing is the hotel workers and the restaurant workers and the caregivers and the teachers, the people who run Los Angeles are being run out of Los Angeles. And so we need to make sure that there's housing for them. And that's going to take the effort of standing to preserve our existing affordable housing and putting the money behind creating new affordable housing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Crystal ball, anybody else?
Well, I think there's definitely going to be more high-density housing, mixed-use housing, transit-oriented development. Will there be enough so that we're not talking about the housing crisis in 50 years? We'll have to wait to see. It's been, I used to work downtown. 15 years ago, I worked downtown, and I walked today from South Park all the way up here, and you can see all the housing that has happened here, and we still have a worse housing crisis than we had 15 years ago. So the problem is really tremendous. I mean, I think Larry is right. I mean, we're in a crisis situation, and we need to get all hands on deck, use every tool that we have at our disposal, and come up with new tools to make it happen. So the challenges are still really great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're at a time of challenge and opportunity. So there's research that shows that if we develop our transit system in the wrong way, we'll have higher income people moving along those transit corridors who may use transit to commute to work, but not for their regular trips. And you actually see a decline in ridership on the transit system. Doesn't make sense. Phil Washington, the new head of Metro, has said that if lower income people are forced to move further away from transit, then he's going to be obligated to build transit to get out to them. Doesn't make sense. So we have to be very thoughtful in terms of how we move forward.
I mean, just that there's now news programs, your program, that there's this attention to affordability that I think I see in the newspaper every day, which wasn't there before we were trying to get downtown just to be inhabited. We didn't realize when we were building the housing downtown that it was going to end up being gentrified immediately. So I see this as a real transition period where there is constituencies being built. So I expect there will be new creative solutions. It won't solve the problem, but at least we'll have more options. And in a modest way, that's what I'm aiming for. Give us some options.
And maybe to frame this not in terms of Los Angeles, but nationally, you know, a lot of the housing finance infrastructure that we had and what was sort of there during the financial crisis is infrastructure that was actually built, institutions that were developed in the wake of the Great Depression. Right? It was response to it was the government's response to the last time the country went through that kind of a housing crisis. And so those institutions, you know, were around for 75 years, and they went through several generations. I think where we are now as a country is it's a time to think about, all right, what is the next 50 years? What is national housing policy ought to look like? And we've got a presidential election taking place next year, and I think it's incumbent on us as citizens to, you know, to expect out of our candidates to be able to address an issue that affects every American. And it's really, it's almost unimaginable to me personally, having been it's so deeply involved in this, that the institutions and the center of the financial crisis being around housing, over the last 7 years, we have not fixed or dealt with those housing issues at a national level. And so I think that we ought to be looking to do that.
And I'm thinking, since California is leading this housing crisis, maybe we'll have solutions for the rest of the country when their time comes around.
We'd welcome that.
So I'm sure a lot of you guys have questions for the panelists. So we have folks here. Liz and Haley will, you know, be able to take your question. Just raise your hand, and they'll come to you with the mic. Does anybody want to get started? Okay.
Hard to see.
All right. Haley's going to get to folks. We see a number of raised hands.
I have two questions that involve the public sector. The first is, if we're in a deep crisis and we have the precedent of public housing projects and public housing programs, why not call for the restoration of them? And the other public sector issue is, if you increase the density of people, I don't hear any discussion about increasing the density of schools, the density of parks, the density of street capacity, the density of utility lines. I mean, it comes as a package. You just don't increase the number of people and leave everything else constant.
Public housing is something I know a lot about. And certainly we should restore all the public housing that's available. And as Larry said, keep it for the most affordable households, so that households needing the most affordable housing can have that. That hasn't been the federal policy, and there have been good reasons for that, but we shouldn't let a single unit of that public housing go away now. It wasn't bad housing. It got a really bad rap for lots of other reasons. But I don't think it's going to be, it's a drop in the bucket that we're talking about now, because so much of it's already been destroyed. There were only 1 million units built nationally. And so the share that Los Angeles got was a tiny fraction of that, and we've already demolished a bunch of that. So on that public housing, yes, keep it all. Yes, keep it the most affordable. It's one of the many drops in this giant bucket that we have to do.
I think that there are a number of collaborative efforts that have come together to try and address this issue, and that include representation from public health organizations, environmental organizations, affordable housing organizations. And so to your point, when we talk about, I mean, I know it's jargony, but if we talk about sustainable, equitable, transit-oriented development, we are talking about ensuring that people have access to affordable housing, transit, schools, jobs, healthy food, parks. I think all the things that you were talking about.
Ed,
With regard to infrastructure, I mean, the discussion here is focused principally on transportation infrastructure, but with regard to the other things, those are very important considerations. Oftentimes, what we're really looking at is infrastructure that exists and is underutilized because of low density. And so, at least in certain areas where we're talking about enhancing density, it's actually to leverage existing infrastructure that is underutilized because of the way development has taken place. But clearly, one has to have an eye towards all of that. The other thing about infrastructure is the extent that you increase these people are all here someplace, right? The extent that you can increase their ability to reside in an area and become part of that tax base, then at least there's an opportunity for that to raise revenue that can assist with further infrastructure development. At least that's how it's thought of in some areas.
Right.
And very quickly,
while-
Larry, just so we can get more
Okay.
questions.
I just wanted to touch on the public housing, is that while we had a small percentage of public housing, we have the largest percentage or the largest stock of the HUD subsidized units in the country here. Unfortunately, HUD's been withdrawing from that and are putting most of their efforts to tenant-based Section 8 vouchers, which doesn't produce the affordable housing. It's on the tenant to find a landlord who will accept it, rather than the project-based Section 8 housing that was actually in the units and kept the whole building affordable. So,
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, hi, my name is Elizabeth Blaney. I'm with Unión de Vecinos, and we've been doing a lot of housing work on the east side, specifically in Boyle Heights, very close to here. And one of the things that I haven't heard much in this discussion has to do with looking at really what affordability means. We've been a proponent for years around having more affordable housing. But we're finding recently, in the last year specifically, that affordable housing is actually doing more damage to our community because it's not affordable for 30% of AMI and below. So we're seeing housing that's being built in our communities for 40%, 50%, 60% AMI, area medium income. When in Boyle Heights, over 7,000 families make less than $25,000 and below. So it's not addressing the need, and it's exacerbating the problem. So a lot of the feedback that we're getting when we're talking to nonprofit affordable housing developers is that, well, that's just how the system is. It doesn't pencil out. We don't get enough subsidy, and our pushback is we need to look more for some private or other, creating some other alternative financial systems that then can support that, because it's really doing damage, and if it's not going to benefit and cause damage, then it shouldn't happen. So my question is really around, maybe specifically around to Jeff or around the financial markets. What are those kinds of conversations being had to create those alternatives so that we're not always stuck in the tax credit housing that we're getting?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that can happen is that the local housing authority, if you're in unincorporated East LA, then that would be the county housing authority. You could, or the developers could talk to them about getting some project-based vouchers for the development. That means these would be Section 8 vouchers, but are dedicated to the building, and that would allow any very, very low-income household to be able to afford to live there, and the household would only pay 30%, about 30% of their income, and then the housing authority would pay the difference. So that's a possibility. And so the county housing authority does have the capacity to provide more project-based vouchers. HUD limits how many project-based vouchers a housing authority could allocate, but the county housing authority has, I think, still a lot of space there to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think I'd add that as we try to look beyond the tax credit system of financing affordable housing, as it becomes more constrained, that there is a lot of attention being given not only locally but around the country to naturally occurring affordable housing in some neighborhoods where you have housing that's out there that is serving people who are very low income, and how do you preserve that? And so coming up with strategies that allow, CDFIs, community development financial institutions, community lenders like Enterprise to put in loan dollars with some equity investment to acquire these properties, ensure long-term affordability. The other thing that may be helpful is, I haven't studied this fully, but I understand that HUD is looking at adjusting its calculation of fair market rents to scale it down to the zip code level, and maybe if it's done that way, it will help in some neighborhoods where you do have very low-income communities to target rents to what they actually are in those communities.
And I would like to point out, since Elizabeth is here and we're talking about density, one of the potential examples of the worst potential density project is in Boyle Heights with Wyvenwood Apartments, which is a 1,200 unit complex. It's the second largest rental complex in the city of Los Angeles. The developer has purchased this and is trying to get a plan through to build 4,200 units, potentially displacing those tenants who have lived there for generations, families who've raised their kids and grandkids, and it's a real community. And that community could be totally destroyed with this plan that would produce more housing.
Though
but-
currently stalled, is my
Yes.
understanding.
Oh, I mean, the one notion I put forward is the idea of no net loss is a theme that we have to figure out how to actually implement. But the notion that we're not saying no development, but to ensure that when development happens, that people who live in a neighborhood don't lose housing in that neighborhood.
Well, not only no net loss, we should be talking about net gain. We should go a step further, you know?
Okay. Let's see. We want to take some more questions here. And one question per person, please. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you all for your information tonight. I wanted to ask, is there anything being done to stop foreign investors who come here and buy up housing and they pay cash in full and they may not even live in the homes?
I'm trying to think about how that relates to density in terms of, are you, the pricing of it? Okay. Okay. Okay, Arcadia. Okay, does anyone want to take that? I'm struggling a bit with the...
I'm concerned about those developers wherever they come from, whether they're here or somewhere else, and we really need to address that of the changing of our communities and the displacement of people, so.
Okay, all right, another...
Mr. Wang, you work for the city of Pasadena, which just published an update of its parking requirements, updated, suggested parking requirements, if I understand correctly. And those are largely the same as they've always been. So Pasadena is squandering an opportunity to increase density and affordability, because we know that parking requirements increase the expense of housing. So how do you keep cities from reinforcing the failed patterns that got us to where we are and improve policy for future generations?
Well, let's see. Firstly, parking is not in my jurisdiction, planning and zoning. But that said, Pasadena does have parking reductions for affordable housing, and they have, Pasadena, I think, is one of the cities that has really transformed itself into a walkable community with a lot of transit-oriented development. Could it do more? Certainly there's a new master plan that was just adopted that does provide for additional many thousands more units in the central downtown area, close to transit, and yet still preserves the single-family neighborhoods. But parking, I know some transit-oriented districts have parking maximums instead of parking minimums. Again, that I'm not sure how that will play out in Pasadena in the future.
But I think you're
not in my
really right on
jurisdiction.
target in trying to identify what some of the seemingly neutral aspects are that are actually driving prices up. And someone like Don Shoup, the parking meister, has been trying to demonstrate that actually if we get rid of parking, all kinds of good things result. So there are many reasons why we should focus on parking. And in those few examples, like in the adaptive reuse, when we separated the purchase of a parking space, which is kind of hidden like the meal on a plane used to be, in your ticket price, once we separate that, who wants to eat that stuff? I'd rather bring my own sandwich. And people felt the same way about their parking spaces. I don't need that thing if it's going to be $30,000 more. And then they gave up their cars. It really, there should be options in our zoning law to uncouple parking, which drives our residential fabric so fully from the provision of housing.
Although I'd interject to say that if we eliminate parking requirements, it can be done and it ends up just being a gift to the developer. And so we have to think about, all right, what is the opportunity to negotiate to get affordability in exchange for that reduction in parking?
Yes.
What the adaptive reuse ordinance actually did was it did away with any parking requirement.
That's right.
It was
They
whatever the
removed the
developer
zoning.
provided, whatever parking off-site that he or she felt was necessary to make the project successful. So that was one of the huge steps in flexibility that was afforded to the developers, and it worked.
But we have no affordable
Exactly.
development happening in downtown Los Angeles.
It didn't compensate for affordability. Absolutely right.
Gotcha. Bringing it all back to affordability. So I'm sorry to say, guys, we've run out of time. Sorry we can't take more questions, but I think this is clearly something we're going to be talking more about. At our station, I'm going to be working on this coverage too, and I learned a lot today. I hope you guys did as well. So why don't we give the panel a round of applause.
And Josie, I think we all want to thank you for staying on this issue. It's really important that we hear it on the air.
Oh yeah, I think I've gotten some story ideas from tonight, so thanks.
And more importantly, to KPCC, everyone should
Yeah.
be supporting this station that's bringing these issues to the community.
Thanks. Thanks. So I think some of us have to leave, but some of us might be able to stick around if you guys want to come talk or talk to me, story ideas. We'll be around. So thanks, you guys.